Morning. I'd like to welcome you back to another edition of our Anchored in the Word morning reflection, and hope that you're having a great start to your week. And if you're listening to this Tuesday morning, hope that you're having a great day. Whenever you get a hold of this text of scripture that we're dealing with, I think you'll find it to be very, very practical and helpful. And so let's go ahead and dig back into the detail of this passage of scripture. We're going to read it together. It's 1 Samuel chapter 8, and we're looking at verses 1 to 9 together. Here's what the text says. And it came to pass, when Samuel was old, that he made his sons judges over Israel. Now the name of his firstborn was Joel, and the name of his second Abiah. They were judges in Beersheba. And his sons walked not in his ways, but turned aside after lucre, and took bribes and perverted judgment. Then all the elders of Israel gathered themselves together, and came to Samuel at Ramah. And they said unto him, Behold, thou art old, and thy sons walk not in thy ways. Now make us a king to judge us like the nations. But the thing displeased Samuel, when they said, Give us a king to judge over us. And Samuel prayed unto the Lord, and the Lord said unto Samuel, Hearken unto the voice of the people, in all that they say unto thee. For they have not rejected thee, but they have rejected me, that I should not reign over them. According to all the works which they have done since the day that I brought them out of Egypt, even unto this day, wherewith they have forsaken me and served other gods, so do they also unto me, unto thee. Now therefore hearken unto their voice, howbeit yet protest solemnly unto them, and show them the manner of the king that shall reign over them. Now this morning what I'd like us to do as we continue digging into the passage is I'd like us to focus our attention on this warning that God gave to the people through Samuel. And we find this in verses 10 through 18. And the way that he starts it out is with the following statement. This will be the manner of the king that shall reign over you. Basically, Samuel is saying, you want a king, you want to be like the other nations. Well, this is the kind of king that you're going to get. And God gives them a king that is consistent with what they're ultimately asking for. Someone who is going to be like the kings of the other nations. And when he begins to break it down, I want you to notice the way that he puts it. The first statement he says is he's going to take your sons and appoint them unto himself. Next he says he will take your daughters, and he will take your fields and your vineyards and your olive yards, even the best of them, and give them to his servants. And he will take the tenth of your seed and your vineyards and give to his officers and to his servants. And he will take your men servants and your maidservants, the goodliest young men. He says he will take the tenth of your sheep, and you shall be his servants. And ye shall cry out in that day because of your king, which you have chosen, and the Lord will not hear you in that day. Now, if you look back over those verses, there is a phrase that is repeated over and over and over again. And that phrase is, he will take. He's going to take this, and he's going to take this, and he's going to take this, and he's going to take this. What's the point? The point is what the people wanted was a king like the other nations. The point that God made is when you get a king like the other nations, he is going to domineer over you. He's going to take your stuff, and he's going to take advantage of the power and the authority that he has. But that last little statement that God makes at the end is very important. He says, on that day, you're going to cry. And you're going to cry because of the kind of king that you have. And the kind of king that you have will ultimately be the kind of king that you have chosen. And on that day, the Lord will not hear you. Now, he's not suggesting that God will be unable to hear their cry. The point is he's not going to listen. He's not going to step into the situation and somehow reverse it. He's saying you will have to experience the weight of your own decision. You're going to have to experience the fruit of your choices. He's not going to bail them out because they have gone over and over and over again and basically demanded that God give them a certain thing. An example of this in the book of Proverbs is he tells his son, he said, you need to listen to the words of wisdom. And at the end of that little section, I believe it's in chapter 2, he says, if you don't listen when wisdom is crying, there's going to be a day that wisdom will mock at your calamity. And the point is that sometimes you cross certain lines that make it impossible to reverse the order of where things are moving. This is what God is ultimately saying in these verses. He's giving the people what they want. And so in verses 19 through 22, you see that when this message is presented to the people are resolute. They despise the warning. They don't listen. In verse 19, he says, "Nevertheless, the people refused to obey the voice of Samuel. They said, 'Nay, but we will have us a king over us.'" Even though the warning was presented, even though God is presenting a resistance to their desire, they do not care. Despite all the warnings, they say, "No, give us what we want." In verse 21, Samuel goes to the Lord. He says, "Here's what they've said." And in verse 22, God says to Samuel, "Hearken, listen, obey their voice, make them a king." Now, when we read these verses, we are reading the beginning of what would be a long story of one of the most troubled kings in Israel's history. Probably not the most troubled king in Israel's history, but there's a lot that is said about Saul. Not as much as David, but it's close. He's their first king, and his life is a tragedy. So what are the takeaways? What can we learn from these verses? Well, let me give you a couple thoughts to close out this section. First of all, I said this yesterday, be careful what you ask for. God may eventually give you what you have demanded, but that demand will come with a price. I think of the story of the nation of Israel, and they were complaining because of God's provision of manna. And it says that as they ate that food, God sent them leanness to their souls. He gave them what their soul lusted for, but when they took it, it ultimately led them to great pain and sorrow. And so if God is resisting you as you push against him and you are demanding something, there may be a day that he says, "Okay, this is what you want. I'll let you have it, but it won't be good." Third thing, a self-centered demand will never end well. When we push against God because we want to fulfill our own personal self-centered desires, there's no way what we choose is going to turn out to be good for us. It's going to lead to a painful form of enslavement. The enslavement for the nation of Israel was they were going to get a king. They were going to be like the nations around them. And that king was going to take from them. That king was going to use them. That king was going to abuse the authority that God allowed him to have over the people. And so that leads me to a final encouragement. Let's ask God to help us to see past the immediate and to see the long-term dangers of demanding things that ultimately will enslave us. And so I want to encourage you, maybe someone this morning is in a situation where you are pleading with God to give you something, and if you were to step back and look at it, you'd have to say, it's his mercy that he said no. It's his mercy that he has resisted. It's his mercy that he hasn't given me what I have demanded. Perhaps some of us might need to step back and ask the Lord to help us to see things through his eyes. And so I know that's a bit of a warning, but it's a warning we may need to hear. May the Lord help us to heed it if that's what we need to hear this morning. Well, if this has been an encouragement to you, I hope you take a moment to share that. Perhaps share it to someone else, along to someone else who can benefit from it. And Lord willing, tomorrow we'll continue as we dig into this passage. Have a blessed rest of your day, and we'll talk later. Bye now.